My next guest is a sociologist, and just in time, I may add, from the University of Wisconsin, University of Washington, and he's got quite a bit of publicity for an unusual study he is doing on embarrassment, and he's been collecting examples. Sure. He's collecting examples of what embarrasses people and why since 1964, and so we thought we'd explore this tonight. Would you welcome Dr. Edward Gross? It's an interesting subject, embarrassment. Everybody gets embarrassed.
Oh, yes.
Is that a pretty much a common denominator among people, but they get embarrassed at different things, or are there universal embarrassments that people suffer?
I think there are universal embarrassments, although a lot of the embarrassments that vary from society to society are interesting. The universal ones are the most interesting of all, and particularly the question as to whether animals get embarrassed or not. You were talking about animals, and some people claim that their dogs get embarrassed, or they look ashamed, or they look frightened. Like
yeah, but isn't that trying to attribute some human value to them?
That's my feeling. But
yeah.
When people have these dogs, they claim that they get embarrassed, and it's very hard to argue.
How many examples of embarrassment, different examples have you been able
We've been gathering them, a colleague of mine, Greg Stone, and I, for about 14 years now.
Why did this intrigue you?
Well, we call them specimens, by the way, of embarrassment.
Right.
We gather specimens from all over the country, and people send them to us. It intrigues us because it's important, as specimens usually are.
Yes, yes. Why is it important to study that? I mean, or is it important?
Well, because think of what happens when you are embarrassed. You stutter, you stumble, you drool, sometimes.
Right.
Your body takes over, and then whatever it is that you were carrying on at the time is interrupted. You're driving along the freeway, for instance, and you're smoking, chatting with the person next to you, and you gesture with your cigarette, and suddenly it drops between your legs.
That's happened.
That stops the transaction.
Yes.
And how you handle it can make the difference between life or death. Or for instance,
That's true.
For instance, when it can be very serious, of course, too, in addition to those circumstances. For instance, when Margaret Trudeau, say, left Canada and disappeared when her husband was fighting for his political life,
Right.
it made quite a difference. It was very embarrassing to him and embarrassing to his government. Or when, say, President Jerry Ford tripped.
Right.
And he became a kind of a national joke.
So that can work against you if it starts to become a joke.
Oh, yes. In his condition, certainly, where a president is not supposed to be tripping. He's not supposed to be a comic figure. He can make jokes, but he's not supposed to be that funny.
But shouldn't people, I mean, isn't it a natural thing to be embarrassed?
Oh, yes. Oh, sure. And indeed, that's, I think, the thrust of most of our studies. It is a very natural thing and occurs to everyone. As, for instance, take a situation when, say, you're applying for a job or you're asking for somebody's hand in marriage.
Right.
Now, there's some people who've done that many times and maybe do it very smoothly. But for most people, when they are asking somebody to marry them, it's assumed that this is a very unusual situation,
Right.
and therefore the person ought to stumble a little bit.
Is it a fear of rejection also?
Possibly, except that the person also ought to stumble because it's important. It's a way of saying it. I don't do this very often, and you're very important to me.
So it's an awkward situation.
That's right, and it ought to be awkward. If you come on like you're reading a script, say, and there's nothing to it, you know,
Right.
why then it's not a very important occasion. It's insulting. So embarrassment is appropriate to the occasion, as it is in many other circumstances.
What's the most universal embarrassment you found that really gets people all flustered?
Oh, the most universal, I think, revolve about sex and the body, practically everywhere. For instance, one of the funniest embarrassments we've ever heard of revolved about a situation that happened at a formal banquet. And there were flowers on the table, candlesticks, and the speaker got up to speak and then noticed that his fly was unzipped.
That's you know.
Yes, and then in the process of hurrying to correct the situation, caught the tablecloth in his fly. Then as he stood up to speak, he took the entire tablecloth with him and everything on it. Everything clattered to the floor, and people in the hall jumped up to see what had happened and wondered what went on. People at the head table looked on. He was bending over to try to unzip himself, and as you know, that's difficult. Finally, somebody ran out and got a pair of scissors and cut him loose.
It's really a tough situation to handle cleverly, isn't it? I mean, there it is, and...
There it is. And particularly, he was speaking on a serious subject, the next 50 years, does it belong to America or Russia? Then he stood up with his piece of tablecloth hanging out of his fly.
That's an attention diverter, all right.
Right. Yeah. And you just can't take such a man seriously. You can't talk about America and Russia with tablecloth hanging out of your fly. What are you going to do? He stood up with his notes and tried to hide it like he was nude. Then he'd get carried away and lift up his notes, and there he was.
Yeah.
And people did, and finally they just collapsed altogether, and they couldn't carry on.
In a situation like that, I guess you try to carry on the best you can, or...
You try, although that one is absolutely dismal. It hurt that man. See, he had been a favorite on the lecture circuit for serious subjects. Well, he now became a figure of fun, and he wasn't able to shift and become a comedian, so... in fact, it followed him everywhere. People would meet him at parties, and their eyes would slowly drift down, to see if everything was in order. Or they'd say, your name, I've heard it someplace, and it just never left him. Finally, the company had to withdraw him from the lecture circuit and give him a job somewhere. And he
What causes people to blush?
Blushing is a very interesting thing.
Is that an automatic reflexive thing?
Partly, yes. It's not exactly known. The physiologists have looked at that, and animals, for example, don't seem to blush, at least in the face, or they blush in other places. Right. At least the blood rushes there. It seems to be an automatic reaction. What happens when, say, you are flustered, or when you're facing a situation, which is what happens when embarrassment occurs, that you can't handle for various reasons, then your body takes over in a very primitive kind of reaction, which perhaps goes back to our primitive ancestry, and your body readies you to do something, like attacking or running away.
Faster.
Right. But none of those things work. It doesn't help to attack this fellow that I'm talking about. It doesn't help to flee. And so you're sort of stalled in midstream. And the blood, say, the first place being withdrawn, say, to the muscles, then you're not going to run away or attack, so what else is there to do? The blood then rushes back to your face and reveals you as being in trouble. It may have a function, too. At least I have a friend of mine who said, when you're embarrassed, that's a kind of a signal, isn't it? You're saying, hey, I'm in trouble. See my red face?
Yeah.
So maybe it has some of that.
It's an interesting theory. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back.